Welcome to episode 3 of the Apologetics Dialogues.
It is so great to be back for this one.
It really is. If you have been following along with us on this journey, you will remember that in episode 2, we talked about different apologetic strategies and methods.
Right. We looked at how people actually approach defending and, explaining their worldview.
Exactly. The frameworks they rely on and how to effectively organize those thoughts. But today we are taking a massive step forward. In this episode, we'll explore arguments for the existence and nature of God.
This is where the rubber really meets the road.
It is, and we are going to be pulling our insights today directly from the work of Dr. Miller. He lays out this incredibly comprehensive progression.
It's a step-by-step approach.
Yeah, taking us from the very basics of observing the physical universe all the way down to understanding the deeply personal nature of a creator.
To really grasp the framework we're looking at today, it helps to view it through the lens of two main categories. First, we have natural theology.
Which is really about observation, right?
Precisely. It is the approach of using basic human reason, logic, and our observation of the physical world around us to establish that a creator exists.
Right.
It doesn't start with religious texts. It starts with the universe itself.
Like looking at the natural world and reasoning backward. Dr. Miller often points out that this aligns with the biblical concept found in Romans chapter 1, verse 20.
Exactly. The idea that God's invisible attributes are clearly seen in what has been made. And then we have the second category, which is biblical theology.
Building on that foundation.
Yes, building on the foundation of natural theology by using special revelation, specifically Scripture, to understand the character, personality, and ultimate purpose of that creator.
So it's the movement from simply knowing a higher power is out there
to knowing exactly who that higher power is.
Okay, let's unpack this because we are going on a journey today that moves from the vast cosmic design of the universe right down to the very logical nature of love itself.
It is quite the journey.
And since we all know natural theology can sometimes get, bogged down in heavy academic terminology.
It definitely can.
I really appreciate how Dr. Miller reframes the basics. He uses these two highly relatable analogies to categorize how human beings actually gain knowledge long before we ever start debating philosophy.
The baby and the toddler.
Yes. He calls them the baby's way of knowing and the toddler's way of knowing.
Those analogies are a brilliant way to illustrate the difference between what philosophers call a posteriori and a priori knowledge.
Let's break those down.
Sure. The baby's way of knowing represents a posteriori knowledge. If you imagine a baby crawling into the kitchen, they don't have abstract, preconceived theories about the world yet.
They just explore.
Right. They learn entirely through raw physical experience. Let's say that baby finds a pile of white powder on the floor, assuming it's sugar, and puts it in their mouth. Suddenly, they know that the powder is sweet.
But they only possess that knowledge after the fact.
Exactly. It requires the physical experience to happen first. When we use natural theology to look at the world, when we observe the intricate design of nature, or wonder at the mathematical precision of the cosmos,
or recognize a universal moral standard.
Yes, we are using the baby's way of knowing. We take our concrete experiences of the physical world and use them to reason our way backward toward the existence of God.
I love that image. It's so visceral. You taste the sugar, you know it's sweet, you look at the universe, you know there's a creator.
But then, as that baby grows up, they develop what the work of Dr. Miller calls the toddler's way of knowing.
And this is a priori knowledge.
Yes. If you picture a toddler playing with building blocks on the floor, and they've carefully stacked a tower of 3 blocks, if you ask that toddler, if you put one more block on top, how many will there be altogether?
They don't have to actually go find another block.
Right. They don't have to place it on the tower and physically count them out. 1, 2, 3, 4. They just use their mind.
They just know it.
They know, through pure reason and logic alone, that 3 + 1 = 4 before any new physical experience even takes place.
What's fascinating here is, how these two simple childhood stages perfectly map onto the 4 classical arguments for the existence of God.
It really is an elegant framework.
The baby's way of knowing, starting with observation and physical experience, is the foundation for the cosmological, teleological, and moral arguments.
Because you have to observe the universe, observe design, or observe human behavior to make those arguments work.
Right. But the toddler's way of knowing, relying purely on logic and conceptual analysis, is the foundation for the ontological argument.
You don't need a telescope for that one.
Exactly. You don't need a telescope or a microscope to make the ontological argument work. You just need to think deeply about the very concept of existence itself.
So let's dive right into those 4 classical arguments from natural theology, starting with the baby's way of knowing. First up is the cosmological argument.
The basic premise here is that the universe is contingent. And by contingent, we just mean it relies on something else.
Everything we see around us depends on something else to exist.
Rain depends on clouds. Clouds depend on the water cycle. If everything in the observable universe is in effect caused by something else, then the universe itself must have been caused by something outside of itself.
It needs an uncaused cause to kick the whole thing off.
But I know philosophers have debated several variations of this over the years. You've got the Kalam argument, the argument from efficient cause, the Leibnizian argument. Before we lose people in the terminology, what is the core difference between them in plain English?
That is a great question, because they do tackle the issue from slightly different angles. The Kalam cosmological argument specifically points to the temporal beginning of the universe.
Meaning time itself had a start.
Right. It relies heavily on the modern scientific consensus that the universe is not eternal. It had a definite beginning in the finite past. And the logic dictates that whatever begins to exist must have a cause.
Makes sense. What about the efficient cause?
The argument from efficient cause is a bit different. It states that an infinite chain of causes going backward forever is logically impossible.
You can't just have an endless line of dominoes falling with no one who pushed the first one?
Exactly. So there must be a primary uncaused cause that sustains everything right now. And then the Leibnizian argument zooms out even further. It argues that every contingent fact must have an explanation for why it exists rather than does not exist.
Why is there something rather than nothing?
Precisely. The only sufficient explanation for a contingent universe is a necessary being, a being that exists by its own nature.
So regardless of which specific angle you take, whether you are looking at the beginning of time, the chain of causes, or the explanation for reality itself, they all point to the same destination.
They absolutely do. They prove the existence of a necessary, immensely powerful, uncaused being that exists entirely outside the boundaries of our physical universe.
Okay, so we have a powerful, uncaused cause. But raw power doesn't necessarily imply a personality or a purpose. A cosmic explosion is powerful, but it's blind. How do we get from a cosmic architect to a purposeful designer?
That is where the teleological argument, or the argument from design, comes in.
Right, the watchmaker.
Yes. Back in 1802, the philosopher William Paley popularized the watchmaker analogy. He proposed a thought experiment.
Yeah.
Imagine you are walking through a forest and you find a mechanical pocket watch lying on the ground.
You wouldn't think it grew there.
You would never look at the intricate gears, the springs, the glass face, and assume it just randomly formed out of dirt and metal over thousands of years.
The specific, complex design implies a deliberate designer.
And Paley argued that when we look at the universe, it is infinitely more complex than a pocket watch. Therefore, it must have a universe designer.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because today we don't just rely on 19th century analogies about pocket watches. We have modern fine-tuning arguments.
The science has caught up.
It really has. Physicists now tell us that the fundamental forces of the universe, things like gravity, electromagnetism, or the expansion rate of the cosmos, are fine-tuned to such an incomprehensibly precise degree that if they were altered by even a fraction of a percent, life couldn't exist anywhere in the universe.
The teleological argument takes that scientific observation of extreme fine-tuning and synthesizes it into a profound philosophical conclusion.
Which is?
It establishes that the Creator is not just some blind, random, unguided force that accidentally sparked a universe into existence. The Creator is highly intelligent and entirely purposeful.
The universe was designed with a specific end goal in mind.
Exactly, which is actually what the Greek word telos means, end goal or purpose. So now our natural theology has given us an immensely powerful, uncaused, highly intelligent, and purposeful Creator.
But is this Creator actually good? We have established power and intelligence, but plenty of powerful, intelligent beings are malevolent.
Good point.
I know the moral argument tackles this, and it relies on a very tight deductive logic puzzle. How exactly does Dr. Miller structure that premise?
The deductive logic is elegant in its simplicity. Premise 1. If God does not exist, objective moral values do not exist. Premise 2. Objective moral values do exist.
And the conclusion.
The conclusion, therefore, is that God exists. And when we use the term objective moral values, we mean things that are truly right or wrong, independently of human opinion, culture, or consensus.
Let me play devil's advocate for a second. Couldn't an atheist or a skeptic just argue that our morals are strictly evolutionary?
Sure, they often do.
That we simply evolved to cooperate so our species survives? And that morality is just a biological instinct, not some transcendent objective truth? How does this framework respond to that pushback?
Many secular philosophers would actually agree with that pushback, but they also recognize the devastating consequence of it.
Which is what?
If morality is merely a biological illusion to keep our species surviving, then nothing is truly objectively right or wrong. It means the worst atrocities in human history weren't actually evil. They were just biologically disadvantageous or culturally unpopular at the time.
That is a heavy realization.
It is. But because we all intuitively know that certain things are objectively, invariably evil, regardless of what any culture says, it points inescapably to a metaphysical grounding for that morality.
So if objective moral values do exist, they require an objective moral lawgiver.
Yes, this establishes not just a powerful and intelligent creator, but a creator characterized by absolute moral perfection.
Which brings us to the final classical argument, the ontological argument. We are shifting away from the baby's way of knowing entirely here.
Right, stepping directly into the toddler's way of knowing.
We are moving away from observing watches, fine-tuned physics, or human morality. This is pure logic and conceptual analysis. I know Dr. Miller highlights the work of Anselm of Canterbury from the 11th century, who defined God as the greatest conceivable being.
Anselm argued that if you can conceive of a maximally great being, it is inherently greater to actually exist in reality than to merely exist in your imagination.
That makes sense.
Therefore, if God is truly the greatest conceivable being, he cannot just be an imaginary concept. By definition, he must exist in reality. Then we have Alvin Plantinga's modern modal argument, which updates this logic for contemporary philosophy.
Hold on, I want to make sure we don't lose anyone there. Plantinga's modal argument often brings up terms like mathematically possible and all possible worlds. What exactly is modal logic in this context?
Modal logic simply deals with possibility and necessity. Plantinga argues that if it is even logically possible that a maximally great, perfect God exists, then a perfect being exists in at least one possible world. And possible world is just a philosophical term for a possible reality.
Okay, I am tracking with you.
But a maximally great being, to be truly perfect, would exist necessarily, not just contingently. And if a necessary being exists in one possible world, it must exist in all possible worlds, including our actual world.
I know that can sound like a dense linguistic puzzle.
It can. But the context provided by Dr. Miller is vital here. Anselm wasn't just sitting in a room doing abstract puzzles to win debates.
Right. For him, the ontological argument was defined as faith-seeking understanding.
It was actually prayerful meditation.
Yeah.
It was meant to build devotion and to affirm to the believer that their faith is entirely coherent and intellectually defensible.
It's about meditating on the ultimate greatness of God and realizing that reason itself points to his necessary existence.
Well, beautifully said.
So let's take a breath and look at what these four arguments have built for us. We have proven that an immensely powerful, intelligent, morally perfect, and necessary God exists.
Yes, we have.
But that leads to a massive transition in our deep dive today. We have to ask, what is this God actually like? Is he just a solitary force sitting alone in the dark before he created the universe?
This raises an important question, perhaps the most important question of all. Because if we look back at the moral argument, it established that God is perfectly good and essentially loving. But if God is perfectly loving, we have to ask ourselves, what exactly is love? Love is not a solitary trait.
It's relational.
Exactly. Love inherently requires both a subject and an object. Someone must be the one who loves, and someone must be the one who is loved. You cannot truly be loving in total, absolute isolation.
And this is the mind-bending aha moment that completely shifts the paradigm.
It really is.
If God existed as a single, solitary person before creating the universe, then his ability to express love would entirely depend on us existing. He would need to create creatures just so he could have something to love.
Which is a problem.
A huge problem. Because a perfect, self-sufficient God cannot depend on his own creation to fulfill his nature. He cannot need us in order to be who he is.
Therefore, if God is perfectly loving and he does not depend on creation to express that love, then love must exist eternally within God's own nature.
Without us.
Without us. This philosophical reality naturally points us straight toward the Christian doctrine of the Trinity, The understanding that God exists eternally as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
A perfect relationship.
Within the divine essence itself, there is a perfect eternal relationship of love. The Father loves the Son loves the Father, in the fellowship of the Holy Spirit.
This perfect love exists entirely independent of you, me, or the universe.
Natural theology leads us to a moral God, but biblical theology reveals a triune God whose very essence is a relationship of love.
So what does this all mean? If God is already perfectly complete, perfectly loving, and perfectly happy within the Trinity, why bother creating us at all?
It's a fair question.
To answer it, Dr. Miller provides a unique, informal argument based around what are known as the five omnis.
The five omnis.
Yes. These five traits reflect the absoluteness of God's character. And it's important to note that Dr. Miller uses the divine name Yahweh throughout this specific section to emphasize the deeply personal nature of this absolute God.
Let's walk through those five omnis, because they build on each other in a really compelling way.
First, we have omnipotent. Yahweh has unbreakable, unlimited power. This means he has the raw capacity to create literally any possible world he chooses.
Okay, that's why.
Second is omnipresent. Yahweh is at all times in every single place. This means he is not a distant clockmaker who wound up the universe and walked away. He has the capability to be intimately present and sustain a relationship with every single person who ever lives.
Third is omniscient. Yahweh knows everything there is to know. He knows every human heart, every hidden thought, every complex mind. There are no secrets, no blind spots, and no misunderstandings with him.
Exactly. And fourth is omnisapient. Now, this is distinct from just having knowledge.
Right, it's about wisdom.
Yes, Yahweh has infinite wisdom. He doesn't just know the raw facts. He knows how to perfectly navigate every circumstance. He knows the absolute best means to achieve the absolute best ends.
And finally, the fifth trait is omnibenevolent. Yahweh's every action is a flawless expression of your perfect love, kindness, and compassion. Everything he does is aimed at promoting ultimate goodness.
So what does this all mean when you stack these five attributes together? It paints a breathtaking picture.
It really does.
According to Dr. Miller, if Yahweh has the unlimited power to create any world, the infinite wisdom to know the best possible outcome, the complete knowledge of every human heart, the intimate presence to be with everyone simultaneously, and the perfect love to desire the absolute good of everyone, then it logically follows that he would create the best possible world.
The absolute best possible world.
Yes, and specifically a world that gives every single person the best possible opportunity to know him, to worship him, and to genuinely enjoy a relationship with him forever.
It completely reframes the purpose of human existence.
Yes.
It argues that we aren't here by random cosmic accident, and we certainly aren't here to serve as mindless cogs in a machine to feed a needy deity.
No, not at all.
We were created out of the sheer overflow of God's perfect self-sufficient love. Dr. Miller points out that these five omnis perfectly align with the famous 1647 Westminster Shorter Catechism, which beautifully states, man's chief end is to glorify God and to enjoy him forever. I really love that phrasing. It's just so warm and deeply relational. But how do we actually take all of this high-level philosophy, the ontological arguments, the Trinity, the five omnis, and use it in the real world?
That's the crucial next step.
Because Dr. Miller is very clear that this knowledge isn't meant to be used as a club for winning arguments in internet comment sections.
No, definitely not. That brings us to the practical application of Dr. Miller's work, which he terms incarnational apologetics.
Incarnational apologetics.
Yes. He offers a massive paradigm shift with this quote. He says that apologetics is primarily a relational discipline that occasionally breaks out in theoretical application.
That is so powerful.
Think about the weight of that. It means you are supposed to be the hands, the feet, the mind, and the voice of Christ to the actual people in your daily life. You embody the truth through a relationship. You don't just aggressively argue it at people.
So, an incarnational apologist actually uses this entire framework we've just discussed, but they do it relationally, walking alongside people in three practical stages.
Right.
Stage one is pre-evangelism. This is where you might use natural theology, like the cosmological domino effect or the fine-tuning arguments, to help clear intellectual brush for people.
Because there are a lot of misconceptions out there.
So many. So many people today assume that believing in a creator is anti-science or fundamentally irrational. You use these classical arguments simply to show that belief in God is highly coherent and intellectually robust. You aren't forcing them to believe. You are just removing the rocks from the road so they can see the path clearly.
And once those intellectual barriers are gently lowered, you move to stage 2, deepening the connection.
Okay.
This is where you bring in the philosophy of the Trinity. You show people that love, community, and relational life aren't just evolutionary survival mechanisms for primates.
They're much deeper than that.
They are at the very foundational heart of reality itself because God is eternally relational. You help people realize that their own deep, agonizing cravings for love, acceptance, and true community are actually cravings for the divine.
And then we reach stage 3, which is revealing purpose. Use those 5 omnis we discussed to help answer humanity's deepest, darkest existential questions. Why am I here? Does my life actually matter?
Everyone asks those questions.
And you can show them, based on this framework, that they were created by a God of infinite wisdom and perfect love, specifically to be intimately known and to experience eternal joy. It takes apologetics out of the dusty academic textbook and makes it deeply, radically personal.
Let's summarize the incredible journey we've taken in this deep dive. We started with natural theology, observing the physical universe and reasoning our way to the reality that a powerful, moral creator exists.
Right.
From there, we reflected on the logical nature of perfect love, which inescapably points toward the beautiful relational reality of the Trinity.
Yes.
And finally, by examining God's absolute character, his infinite power, presence, knowledge, wisdom, and goodness, we found a profound explanation for the purpose of our existence. We exist to be invited into the eternal love that God has always known.
It really is a stunning progression when you view it all laid out together like that.
It truly is. And it leaves us with something provocative to consider as we wrap up.
Okay, let's hear it.
If the very foundation of reality is a God who is eternally relational, how does that change the way you view your own seemingly ordinary daily interactions with the people around you? Our messy human struggles for community, our desires to be understood, actually echoes of the universe's foundational design.
That is a brilliant thought to chew on as you go about your week.
Yeah, it really reframes everything.
Join us next time as we'll explore the problem of evil and suffering.
Looking forward to that deep dive.
Same here. Invite listeners to engage in the deeper dialogue about incarnational apologetics with Joseph R. Miller at his website, morethancake.org. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the existence and nature of God.